This is Carlos Orozco. I'm the Medical Director of Cell Wellbeing, and I'm going to be talking to you about the Smart Card. The Smart Card is product of technology that used to be known as nanotechnology, but we gone beyond that. Now we're using frequencies and vibration in order to allow the card to work. The card doesn't have energy by itself. It picks up the energy that is in the cosmos. That energy has been known by many different names, starting with the energy of the vacuum as defined by Walter Nernst in 1913, and then Otto Stern called it the spinning energy, Albert Einstein called it zero-point energy, Max Planck and James Maxwell call it scalar energy, and the Chinese know this as qi. So this goes back a long way, and it's basically because it is the energy of creation. This energy will never ever end. It's the energy that allows the microcosmos and the microcosmos to talk to one another through something we call dark matter. Dark matter and the energy of the vacuum, or the energy of space, or cosmic energy, is pretty much that energy. So Walter Nernst in 1913 discovered that the so-called space is in fact filled with energy. And we can see that in the micro and the microcosmos. Let me give you an example. When we think of an atom, we normally think of a particle that is indivisible, and yet we can divide it. It is divided into electrons that are in the shells, and then we got a particle that is sort of solid, that is called the nuclei. And in the nucleus of every atom, there are neutrons and protons. And inside the protons and neutrons, there are particles called as gluons. And then they got gravitons, and we got mesons, and we got quarks. So this is a never-ending story where the little list gets little, and little, or the smallest gets smaller, smaller. The fact is that there is a fundamental particle from which everything is made, and that's something that recently the work of quantum physics has discovered. But we won't go into that a lot. What I would like to share with you is to tell you that every single bit of space within those subparticles, subatomic particles, are filled with space and therefore filled with energy. Space is a very real thing. Einstein called it space-time. And the reason that is space-time is because one depends on the other. And therefore energy and matter can be interchangeable. We can change a particle into a wave and a wave into a particle. And there have been studies that you might be able to watch on YouTube if you wish to do so, where people have demonstrated that it's the consciousness, believe it or not, the consciousness of the human being that is able to translate a wave into a particle and a particle into a wave. And this is just amazing. And consciousness is nothing else but energy as well. So we are filled with energy, we're full of it. And the world and the cosmos were with it. So this device called the Smart Card is a piece of metal that has embedded a frequency. The frequency is known as the Schumann frequency, which has a value of 7.83 Hertz. Otto Schumann discovered this back in the 1950s and published a paper that he wrote in a little journal of physics. That was unknown until another person who basically named the so-called alpha waves discovered that there is a frequency that allows for things to work in perfect harmony, and that is known as the alpha frequency. And that alpha frequency has a range in terms of cycles per second. It goes from around 7 cycles per second up to 13 cycles per second. And we define a cycle per second a hertz. So we're looking at 7 hertz to 13 hertz. Otto Schumann discovered that the so-called frequency that has his name, which is the Schumann frequency, is 7.83 hertz. This is the frequency of the Earth. This is the frequency of the universe. Everything in the universe resonates with everything else because of that frequency. Our lifestyle now has changed that frequency. Why? Because we're using Wi-Fi, we're using mobile phones, we're using telecommunications, we're using air conditioners and computers, just to mention a few devices that are influencing dramatically the ability of the planet to sustain that harmony. Nowadays, the planet is quite disharmonious, and we can see that because of the so-called climate change. and many species are losing their track, as these are migratory birds and migratory bees and migratory whales, which are losing their track. And therefore, whales beach themselves, bees lose their ability to go back to the beehives, and birds are not able to go back to the trees and nests where they were born from. And this is causing a major ecological impact in the planet itself. So, is there a way that we can protect ourselves from the impact of such influences, such as electromagnetic frequencies? Of course there is, and the answer is in this card. This card has the ability to transfer energy. It doesn't have energy on its own right, but it's able to transfer that energy. And how does it do it? Just by simply using a coil that is embedded in the card and allowing the energy to travel right through it. At the bottom on the side of the coil, we got two lines, and these lines represent the yin and the yang, as the Chinese will say, or the yes and the no, the east and the west, the up and the down. So it's pretty much the exact opposite. And that is the direct opposite is what allows one to be defined by the absence of the other. Let me give you an example. If I were to define light, instead of going into the physics of it, I simply can say that light is the absence of darkness. And if I were to define darkness, I would say it is the absence of light. The same applies to health, as the Book of Robins mentions, that health is simply the absence of disease. And disease is when the body goes out of ease. And we know that that is harmony. At the same time, disease is the absence of health. So this is pretty obvious, isn't it? However, the main thing is that one is defining the other by its absence. And in that way, we got the yin and the yang, pretty much the right and the left, or the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. And the card allows for that energy to be transferred in order to give us the opportunity to choose these two options instead of only one of them. Because as I was saying before, the absence of one defines the presence of the other. What I'm going to show you now is how to use the card and what it can be used for. So let's start with what can it be used for. As I was mentioning, the planet has a frequency, 7.83 Hertz, but we're going right of it. So this frequency is able to bring back that frequency when it is applied to the person or to the biological system by simply moving it up and down. So you just need to take it by the end of the coil and then move it up and down. And when you do that, that energy that is everywhere, which is called dark matter or dark energy, or the energy of the vacuum, spinning energy, scalar energy, 0-point energy, etc., we can actually transfer that energy into the biological system, and then the biological system is able to use that energy in its own wisdom to basically harmonize itself. And that's the key to it, harmony. And harmony is followed by duality. That means the system might need something to vasodilate or become larger or do something called anabolism. But at the same time, it could do the opposite. It can inhibit something from happening. It could make something small instead of big. It can cause catabolism instead of anabolism. It allows for vasoconstriction instead of vasodilation. Instead of speeding up processes, that energy can slow them down. So you need both. You cannot only have one, because as I was saying before, the absence of one defines the presence of the other. So this device now, as it transfers energy, brings harmony to the system, and that harmony is coming from the energy of the cosmos. So now allow me to show you how this is done. We're going to use water to give you an example of this. Why? Because the human body is up to 90% water. And we're not just considering the water that is found in plasma or in the blood, of course, but we're considering the water that is produced by every single biochemical reaction, reactions that we call hydrolysis. We also have water in our cells. Our cells are not solids, they are plasmatic objects, and that is, by object I mean not entities, that in their own right they are just like a full organism. So this water allows for communication to take place. And when we talk about communication, we talk about a flow of information. And when a body gets sick or gets ill or gets into a state of disease, it loses that communication. And therefore the flow of energy stops. And when that happens, there is confusion. And every part of that make up a cell or make up a tissue or make up an organ or make up a system stop working the way they should. So the body uses compensation. And that's a natural ability of the body to look for other sources of energy so that the body can continue to work accordingly based on the importance of the function it is performing. So one organ will give up the energy that it needs to live and to work in harmony with the rest of the body for the sake of the greatest good, which is the well-being of the body. Once we apply that energy to the body, by simply moving the card up and down among someone or something, we can actually transfer that energy into the body, and therefore the body doesn't have any need to compensate anymore because the energy is given to it. And once that happens, this translates itself as a force that is the living force that allows the body to regain harmony. So I'm going to give you a few examples of this as we go along. So just to summarize, the card is used to bring the body back into harmony. That is the main objective of it. How is it done? By simply moving it up and down. Any system, and you can even blow through it like that. You always blow on top of the coil, allowing the two lines to divert that energy to the system so that the system knows what to do with it. And as I was saying, each line represents the yin and the yang, the right and the left, the up and the down, the sick and the health, the slow down and speed up, the catabolism and anabolism. So all this allows us to transfer that energy and make it work with efficiency, meaning the body will use the least amount of it to give the maximum return. And as this happens, the body will regain harmony. So now I'm going to show you how this is done in a biological system. We're going to use somebody. We're going to do a few demonstrations with force. Why force? Because force is defined in the word energy. Why? Because in physics, energy is defined as a capacity to do some work. And work, mechanically speaking, is when you apply a force to an object in order to move it a certain distance. That is called work. And because we're applying a force, this force is quite mechanical. And that will depend on the amount of it. That means how much force we need to use in order to move an object. And that is reflecting kinetic energy. We break the so-called potential energy and we make it kinetic. At the same time, we know that energy and matter cannot be destroyed nor created. They only can transform themselves into each other. And that is called the universal law of conservation of energy and matter. So I'm going to proceed to explain now by showing you how to use this card, the ability of the card to bring that harmony back into your body.